Hello and welcome to part 2 for how to paint Garrett from Cult of Paint. So in this video we're going to change the colour of the lighting on it. If you watched the previous video, and you just saw on the model there actually as well, I painted it with kind of like green reflections that could represent like trees, foliage and whatever else, like just nature around the model. But after having seen the concept art for the model, I decided to change it and go for the nice red glow that you see on the box art, or at least something similar to it. My artwork's a little bit more red by the time it's finished, but that's where the idea comes from anyway. So this isn't a standard step that you would do if you were going to paint the model with a red glow. You definitely wouldn't kind of put such a high finish on it, especially putting the green down then go red over. This is just a case of a kind of a repaint and then using what's already there and trying to blend it all in. So what I'm doing is starting with Mephiston Red from Games Workshop, and I'm just very roughly blocking in, or trying to rub out basically all the green that's on there. Now I'm trying to do this in a sort of a neat way, but obviously this isn't going to be the actual finish of the red, so the red has to be all blended in and done nicely afterwards. But I don't want to rub out all of the white shine that I've already got on the model, because that has got a reasonably high finish level on it and already looks quite nice. So I'm trying to get rid of the green while keeping the nice paintwork that's all there. But also, while I'm painting it in, you'll see that I'm using it's a motion that I use quite often when I'm painting things in, where I don't want like a flawless smooth finish. It's kind of like a sort of a circular motion that I do. What it does is allow elements of the lower layers to show through a little bit. Now I don't really want the green to show through, but because the red goes over it, it'll turn kind of browny anyway. It's not like there's going to be patches, but it's just different levels of opacity and translucency for the layer that I put down. So there'll be layers where it looks it just looks more kind of patchy while still being all red, and that will kind of represent more reflections and things, so it's not just a solid colour. And you can see here that I've got the model tilting backwards, so you can see the underside. Now obviously the model holder's in the way a little bit, unfortunately, but you can see the general idea. But the idea is to hold it kind of upside down, or at least tilting backwards, so you can see the underside, because those are the parts that are going to hit all of the red glow, because the red glow is obviously coming from below upwards. Now you have to a little bit further out than that as well, because the red is not just coming from below, it would be coming from like the distance as well, which would translate to coming from the side. And maybe if there are mountains around it that are like volcanoes and things around it, then those would also get reflected in the armour. So there could be an awful lot of red in here. Not to mention that the reflected red light can come off, like so if there are rocks around this, the lights would be red on those, which would then reflect back onto the armour as well. So you have to get rid of quite a lot of the kind of the mid-tones, and it's, I suppose, not completely accurate to have the super white highlights on there, but the thing is that they translate really nicely with the high contrast. So what you end up with is red, black and white, because with adding the red, you're going over most of the mid-tones of the greys as well. And red, black and white it's a fantastic colour scheme, especially when you've got like a deep dark red as well. Everything just kind of pops out, and it'll make the red look really vibrant against the black, and then the high tonal contrast between the deep red and the black makes the white stand out, so it makes it look extra shiny as well. You can see I drop into the neutral grey every now and then, and blend that in with the red. It makes it kind of like a pinky, almost purpley kind of, not really purple, but heading towards that sort of way. It is a little bit so Mephiston red is obviously a darker red, so it might have I think probably has small amounts of blue in it, just a very small amount. But so the thing is, well, if you've carried on from the previous video and you did paint it green, so you're doing exactly the same as what I'm doing, it's kind of a good exercise in that it forces you to not be precious about the painting that you've done. So just because you've painted something and it looks alright, it doesn't mean to say that you can't paint over it and change the whole atmosphere of the piece. So obviously I've wiped out most of the green now, and it's really entirely changed the atmosphere of the piece. It looks much more menacing now, and I prefer this look. Really, I was really happy that I found the concept art to go with it. One thing that you can do is kind of a quick cheat. I know a lot of people do this when they do kind of like OSL work and reflect kind of glow. Quite often on busts and things, you'll see either light coming from below or from the side. You can use an airbrush, and you can tilt the model backwards and just airbrush underneath it directly upwards, and using red, and it'll just hit all of the parts where the glow would naturally hit. You don't have to work anything out yourself, and the job is basically done for you then. But I mean, the only thing you'd have to be a little bit wary of is the speckle effect that you get from using an airbrush. Sometimes if you focus on, say, the leg area and then you move the brush out while you're spraying, then you would get speckles on the chest and the head area. So you have to be a little bit more careful with the positioning of the airbrush. So not quite. So with the zenithal highlight, when you apply it and you just keep the airbrush in the same kind of distance from the model all the way around, you'll find that the paint closer to the airbrush is a lot neater than the paint further away, and it gets more speckled the further away it gets, because the spray is dispersed more, so it's not tightly positioned. So here you can see I've got some German grey. Not German grey, sorry. It's actually Games Workshop Corvus black. It's very similar to German grey. So it's like if you don't have Corvus black, then you can use German grey. Corvus black is probably a little bit bluer, but they're very similar tonally. And so I'm using this to glaze the mid-tone. So before, the mid-tone was more neutral grey, but now that I'm going over it with the Corvus black glazes, I'm actually shifting the amount of dark on the model, and what this does is it makes all the highlights pop out even more. So you can see now all the highlights on the upper belly, on the chest and the head and things, they just stand out really strongly, because I've taken away all of the neutral grey pretty much. So now what I'm doing is I'm just looking and adding. I'm actually going over some of the bits that were slightly more finished, because I'm changing the position of the reflections. Just really kind of push more the darker atmosphere that I want. So I mean, it's kind of a tricky thing to force yourself to do, to paint over areas that you've already painted, but you can definitely see as I'm doing it how it really pushes the white highlights higher. That little red that I put at the front of the helmet, I wasn't super happy with that, but I mean, technically it's right, because if you look at the curve on the face, it curves almost down to vertical at the front, but it just kind of looked a bit weird. So I think I'll go back and whiten that up a little bit more. What you do have to be really careful with on this is that when you paint the red on, if you go too close to the really light highlights, then it's going to go pink, because the translucency of the red, it's just going to, the white's going to show through. So going over the black areas, it's fine. It doesn't matter with some of the black showing through. It just makes the red darker. You can add more red on top of that, and it'll keep the red. It'll keep the same like redness, just make it redder. Whereas if you paint the red over the white, it's going to start off pink, and then as you add more red, then it goes redder. Here you can see I've got some Wild Rider red, and there's also some Troll Slayer orange there. These are to add kind of like interesting reflections. So these would be like the lava glows, the extra strong glow, things like that. When you're painting these in, you don't want to be too focused on the shape. Try and keep them rough, then blend them. Keep the edges a little bit soft, but keep the shape distinct. But don't worry too much about making sure that it's a hard shape. In fact, a hard shape makes it look kind of wrong, because it's not a mirror that is reflecting. If it was a mirror, then you have to paint basically a landscape on the armour, which is also fine. Like it would be quite cool to paint a mirror effect armour, but because of the highlights that I painted on, I haven't painted them as mirror effect. And you can see that because if it was a mirror effect, all the white highlights would actually just be clouds and whatever is in the sky. So you'd have to paint in accurately wherever the sun is and like the clouds around it, like if there's fluffy clouds or whatever, or if it's a blue sky, then it will be blue reflections and things. By making the armor slightly rougher, it's not incredibly rough. So the difference between shiny and matte is the amount of roughness on it, and the more rough it is, the more matte it becomes, and then that will then diffuse the light because the surface isn't reflecting the light directly, so it kind of all breaks it up. It's a mildly rough surface, if that makes sense. So it's reflecting like a reasonable amount of the light, enough that you would get a rough shape from a reflection. So if there was, say, like a person standing in front of this armour and you wanted to reflect the person in the armour, it would be a roughly human shape, but you wouldn't get like any of the details on the human. So you can see there I'm just watering down the neutral grey a bit more. The paint, I'd use the paint for something else actually, so it's already starting to dry out. So this is German grey that's on the wet palette that I'm using. Now I'm just picking out the top highlights on the trousers, or I guess pants if you're American. Although pants to us English people are underwear. So but that's besides the point anyway. So what I'm doing is I'm picking out the upwards facing sections. I don't want to highlight these too much. Now I could have gone for a colour to contrast against the red, but which would be kind of a greeny colour. But I hate red and green combinations. Not at Christmas, that looks fine, but red and green does give a very strong Christmas vibe, and every time people use red and green, that's sort of the message that you're getting from it. So even though it is a contrasting colour, I don't really like it. So I just kept with the grey, because there's already grey on on the armour, because I've taken away all the neutral grey pretty much, going over it with the red, so then I could then put the neutral grey on the trousers. I still want to keep the trousers really kind of indistinct, so they're working with pretty much exactly the same colours that are on the armour, but without keeping them shiny. And you can see that the tonal range is much lower, so it doesn't go up to white, and the highlights are much softer. You can see I'm just using some of the Troll Slayer orange just to put a couple of dots and things on there. You know, which again, I just like pushing the reflections a bit more, like just glowing coals and whatever. You know, it just happens to be in the environment that's making everything sort of have red light. So on this section here on the shoulder, I end up messing around a bit on it, and I can't make my mind up on how I want it to look. So technically, because it's almost entirely upwards facing, it should be white, or light blue, the same as all the other reflections on the armor. But because I've got that really nice highlight on the neck and the front of the chest, I wanted it to be dark next to that, especially because there's a hard line on the armor there. So I can do the with non-metallics. If you have light next to dark, it pushes the contrast nicely, and things show up well. Whereas if I make that top section of the shoulder light, then it's taking away the contrast of the highlight next to it. So you can see at the moment it looks nice and shiny, but if I take that shoulder up to a light highlight, it's not going to look anywhere near as shiny. Yeah, that highlight that I put on the trousers there, well, it looks kind of nice. It's too strong, so you can see that I just rubbed it out with my finger. Don't be afraid to use your fingers on models, especially on these larger ones where you can get your fingers in. So the same thing that happens with these glow effects that I paint on the armor, compared to which are then contrasted with the super bright highlights on the armor. So as I said, the super bright highlights on the trousers are much softer. The same will be true for the red glow on the trousers as well. But they still will glow red, very distinctly red, but they won't have the hard detailed reflections on. So already at this stage, I think you can see the atmosphere has completely changed from the original painting. It looks much more sinister now. Probably a little bit more like I'm not sure. Maybe the Star Wars film where it was Obi-Wan versus Anakin, where he chops all his arms and legs off. That kind of atmosphere anyway. But you can see I'm using a slightly larger brush than I normally use. Well, for a start, it's a much larger model. It's I think 54mm in scale anyway. But it's just having the slightly larger brush allows me to keep more paint on there, and I can make kind of quick, softer marks. What tends to happen is that when you use a larger brush and you load it up. So here, actually, this is quite interesting. I actually went back and I used the airbrush to push the red much more strongly. Now, some of you might think, actually you preferred it before. And to be fair, the previous image I think looked fine, really, but so I was saying about the size of the brush, and I can get more down and things like that. However, it's still taking a long time to get a lot of glazes down, especially because the red is not an incredibly opaque colour, and I just wanted to get that red down quickly, and then I can fix it afterwards. So I did what I described earlier on, and I just turned the model backwards and sprayed the red, Mephiston red, same colour I'd already been using, but I was careful not to get that spatter, because what you'll find is because of the direct line with the airbrush, when you go, so paint will go directly where you aim it forward, so you get the lighting effect to follow a straight line. But if you've been painting the top-down effects and you've been judging it by eye roughly, you will find that some of the red will probably go over some of the highlights that you've got on there, that you picked out maybe purposefully, that would be nice interesting parts and things that could completely wipe them out. So I say be really, really careful while using an airbrush when you've already been painting something and you've done it fairly neatly, because even if the paint gets close to where you've been painting, it's very easy to get that spatter, well, not really spatter, but the speckle effect to go over it, and it just looks kind of naff. Yeah, but since I used the Mephiston red airbrush effect all over it as well, well, I say all over, it's mainly the lower legs and the lower belly, really. But yeah, since I did that, I have like a much stronger red now, and it just sped up the whole process, really. I didn't record it for airbrushing. I'm not really set up that well for recording airbrushing, although I kind of wish I had shown you how to do that. It took me literally like 20 seconds to do it. But yeah, so in future videos, if I use an airbrush, I'm going to try and show you how I've used it, but I wasn't sure I was going to be able to capture it very well, and it just looked a mess, and I would just make a mess of my painting area. One thing that you should really be aware of as well, after you've finished all your airbrushing and things, are the bolts that are on the armour, or rivets, sorry, because they are round and they will focus the light on them. So that is true for the top highlights as normal, so you get the little white dot on top of them, but for the underside bounce highlights, which will be red, so the top highlights on rivets should be pretty much always white in this case, unless they're in the shadows, and even then it's most likely going to still catch some light on it, but depending on where it is. Like if you had a like a rivet on the lower side of his trousers, it's all going to be red, but like generally the rivets that are kind of around on the rest of the model, it's going to be a white dot and then a red bounce highlight underneath it. So you can see here, I keep changing my mind on how various panels will catch the light, because you have to decide between what's going to be accurate, what's going to look good, and where you want the focal points to be. And these flat panels, I think I've mentioned this before in other videos, but flat panels are really hard to make look metallic, because there's no curve, so you can't really paint like nice variations of reflections in them and things like that. It's so easy to make something round look metallic because you can paint the bounce highlights, but in a flat surface it just tends to reflect. If it's facing upwards, it's just going to reflect the skies. So if it's a mirror, then maybe you can paint, like I said before, all the clouds and the blue sky effect, so that might look sort of shiny, but otherwise it's just going to be kind of light blue or white facing upwards. So it can become very overpowering, and two, it's hard to tell if it's metallic or if it's just white. So here I was considering painting in a reflection from the tubing that goes from his face. It's not really worth putting in. It wouldn't be very visible. I don't know. I mean, it's okay. You could argue that it could work as a shadow, but that would require the lighting to be from that direction, so it would be coming from the right, and I haven't really pushed the lighting from that direction, so it looks sort of wrong. It would have been nice maybe if the tubing did actually go more to the left, so more towards the belly area, because then I could make it work as a shadow. It's nice to paint on some of the shadows. You see I've already got one on the top of the belly section from under the neck armour. And I did have a nice one actually on the leg until I airbrushed over it. So what I'm doing here is just going back and darkening in that whole section behind the pipe now. So there I decided that the armour on the arm was too light, it was distracting to the eye, taking away focal points and things, and same for the lighting on the shoulder here. It was just it was taking away from the non-metallic effect and taking away from the focal point as well, so I've pushed both of those back now. So that's the end of this video. You can see here I just spent a little bit longer tweaking a couple of bits that I'd started working on there. But there's a little bit more to go on it, and I am intending to do a base and possibly a backdrop so that the rest of the model looks, fits in with the setting of the red glow. But anyway, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you very much for watching.